Welcome to Module 7. Today, we are stepping away from the soil and into the halls of government to explore urban policy, land use, and agribusiness. We're going to investigate how policies, zoning rules, and business strategies shape the future of our communities. As you'll see throughout this module, thriving as an urban farmer isn't just about knowing how to grow food. It's about navigating the rules of the game, finding space, and staying profitable in a competitive market. Local zoning codes, state agricultural laws, and federal food safety standards all play a role. At the same time, land is expensive in cities, and farmers must develop smart business models to make their work financially sustainable. By the end of this module, you'll see how urban farms succeed by balancing three forces: policy frameworks, land use decisions, and agribusiness strategies. Together, these factors determine who can grow, where they can grow, and whether their farm can survive in a competitive market. As we move through this module, keep asking yourself, if you were an urban farmer in your city, how would you navigate the rules, land constraints, and markets to build a thriving, sustainable business? Our journey is divided into three key lessons. In Lesson A, we'll ask who can grow where, as we dive into urban farming and zoning. Lesson B covers the rules of the game, focusing on food safety and the legalities of selling produce. Finally, in Lesson C, we move from harvest to cash flow, learning how to start a viable urban agribusiness. Together, these lessons will give you a roadmap of urban farming, and by the end of this module, you'll be able to see how policy, land use, and business models intersect in real-world urban agriculture. If every vacant lot in your city could be farmed, how would it change the way your community eats, works, and looks? California grows more food than any other state, over $50 billion worth every year. That means the rules about land use, zoning, and agribusiness here don't just affect local farmers. They shape our food system as a whole. As we move through this lesson, keep this in mind. Who gets to farm where and under what rules is one of the most important questions shaping the future of urban agriculture. Let's start with a quick poll. If you had to start a farm inside your city tomorrow, where would you put it? Think about the spaces you pass every day. Would you pick a vacant lot on your block, your own residential yard, or maybe a garden at your school or local college? Think about why that specific location feels right to you. Is it the size of the space, or how easy it would be to get to? Let's take a few moments to discuss. Surprise! The answer is that you can grow produce in all three locations. But, and this is the big catch, the laws of zoning, liability, and regulations change significantly for each site, especially if your goal is not just break even, but make real money from your hard work. Growing food for your family is one thing. Starting a business is another. Each location has its own set of red tape that we're going to learn how to cut through. Urban agriculture doesn't exist in a vacuum. It's shaped by laws at multiple levels. So to understand who can farm where and under what conditions, we need the legal framework. Look at the inverted pyramid on the slide. Local laws at the bottom, state laws in the middle, and federal laws at the top. This is the policy ladder. Local laws are closest to the ground and affect farmers day to day. City zoning and county rules decide whether food production is allowed in a neighborhood, an industrial area, or a public space. They can also cover details such as whether produce stands are permitted or whether animals, such as chickens, are permitted. State laws set the broader rules that apply across the entire state. This is where you see standards for things like certification, inspections, and compliance, especially if a farm wants to sell into formal markets or scale up. Federal laws establish a nationwide baseline for food safety, labeling, environmental protections, and broader agricultural policy. Even if it looks different locally, everyone still has to follow those national standards. So the key idea is layered influence. Local, then state, and then federal. Zoning shapes what's possible on a specific site. State rules shape how farms operate across the state, and federal rules set the top-level guardrails. Now let's start zooming in on California, beginning with local zoning. Local laws are the most immediate and visible rules that urban farmers will face. In the city of Riverside, the local government handles zoning and permitting, deciding where community gardens, farmers markets, or rooftop farms can operate. Meanwhile, the County of Riverside Agricultural Commissioner's office handles the enforcement, things like making sure your scales are accurate for fair pricing, regulating pesticide use, inspecting farms and market sites to ensure food safety and adherence to local codes. They are the boots on the ground for farming oversight at the local level. Once local rules are navigated, urban farmers must also operate within the state's agricultural framework. State laws create the rulebook for all of California. The California Department of Food and Agriculture, or CDFA, oversees statewide programs including certified farmers markets and pest management. Think of state laws as the bridge that ensures a tomato grown in Riverside meets the same standards as one grown in Sacramento. It's the state's farming rulebook that keeps our markets consistent. From here, we climb one more rung up the ladder: federal laws, which set national standards for food safety, agriculture, and environmental protection. Federal laws are the highest layer of agricultural regulation. While local governments handle zoning and states create their own farming rules, federal agencies provide nationwide protections and standards. These laws ensure that whether food is grown in Riverside, California, or in rural Iowa, it follows the same baseline rules for safety, fairness, and environmental stewardship. At the federal level, the USDA sets national farming policies and manages food programs like the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. Simultaneously, the FDA regulates the safety of the fruits, vegetables, and processed foods we eat. These rules make sure the food system is transparent and safe for everyone, regardless of which state they live in. We also have the EPA, or Environmental Protection Agency. Their job is to protect our land, air, and water by regulating pesticide use and waste management practices in agriculture. The EPA provides the overarching protections that keep our environment safe while we grow the food we need. This ensures that farming practices don't come at the expense of our natural resources. So, where exactly could you plant in Riverside? It depends on the zone. In Riverside, 3 zoning categories shape a lot of the urban agriculture options: vacant land, residential yards, and public facilities like schools and colleges. First, vacant land zoned RA5. That's residential agricultural. It's the most flexible category because it can support full-scale farming, including plants, livestock, and poultry. You can even do pick events and sell produce on site. The catch is it usually applies to larger parcels, at least 5 acres, and if you want to sell off-site, you'll likely need permits. Second, residential yards zoned R1. This is where home gardens and small greenhouses fit in. People can sell produce on site and use a small sign, but bigger produce stands aren't allowed. So it's more of a neighborhood scale option, not a full business. Third, public facilities zoned PF, like school or college gardens. These are designed mainly for education, classes, demonstrations, hands-on learning. Sales might be possible, but usually only with county approval. So the big takeaway is, zoning doesn't just decide if farming is allowed, it shapes what kind of farming is realistic. Take a look at the Riverside City zoning map. Notice the 3 categories we've been talking about: RA5, residential agricultural; R1 to 7,000, single-family residential; and PF, public facility. Each is highlighted here to show how farming interacts with city planning. Areas like Rubidoux or the neighborhoods along Van Buren Boulevard have different designations than the commercial centers downtown. Zoning isn't just about where buildings go. It reflects a city's priorities. It shows us how a city balances the need for housing with the need for open space and agriculture. A unique feature in the city of Riverside is the Riverside Greenbelt, which is one of the clearest examples of how zoning can actively protect farmland from urban development. Protected by RA5 zoning, these 5-acre minimum lots are shielded from developers who might want to build malls or apartments. Here, you can farm, live in one house, and even run a small farm stand. This policy is a powerful tool that preserves our citrus heritage and keeps farming alive right inside the city limits. But what about smaller, messy vacant lots in cities? That's where the Urban Agriculture Incentive Zones Act comes in. This California law, adopted in 2013, allows landowners to get a major property tax discount if they turn a vacant city lot into a farm. A contract is created between a landowner and the city/county to convert a vacant or blighted lot into a mini farm. The contract length must be at least 5 years. This ensures stability. Land can't be flipped immediately back to development. Eligible lots can be as small as a basketball court, 0.10 acres, or as large as 3 acres. It's a way for the state to encourage landowners to use their space for the community. UAIZs aren't just about turning vacant lots into farms, they create ripple effects across the whole community. This slide shows 5 big benefits that often come together when urban agriculture is supported through incentives. First, green space and recreation. Farms can double as safe, walkable open space, especially in neighborhoods that don't have many parks. Second, ecology. More greenery helps cool cities, restore soil, support biodiversity, and recycle nutrients through practices like composting. Third, an economic boost. Local produce sales and farmers markets can generate income and create jobs, not just for farmers, but for vendors and market staff as well. Fourth, community building. These spaces bring neighbors together through volunteering, gardening, and shared harvests. And fifth, food education. People, especially kids, learn where food comes from by growing it, which makes healthy eating feel real and hands-on. So the takeaway is, UAIZs create benefits far beyond food. They turn vacant land into a multipurpose community asset. Next, we'll look at the limitations and why incentives alone aren't always enough to sustain urban farming. California's agricultural rules don't just shape rural farming, they also affect urban and peri-urban agriculture by controlling land use and water use. This slide shows three connected case studies: zoning, farmland protection, and groundwater limits. First, zoning and permitting. Counties and cities decide where commercial farms and vineyards can operate and what's allowed to be built. In fast-growing areas like parts of the Central Valley, those choices often determine whether land stays farmland or becomes housing and industry. Second, farmland preservation. Some counties use a one-for-one rule. If an acre of farmland is developed, another acre must be protected. But farmland is still being lost quickly, about 1 square mile every 5 days, often on prime, fertile soil. Third, water regulations. California is tightening groundwater pumping to prevent long-term damage, including land subsidence, where the ground sinks and infrastructure gets damaged. Bottom line, these regulations aren't just paperwork. They shape whether farmland and water resources can survive alongside urban growth. Next, we'll look at how labor laws fit into this picture too. Napa County is one of California's best-known agricultural regions, globally famous for wine and vineyards and for nearly $70 billion in production value. But value brings conflict. When land is worth that much, how do we decide which hillsides become vineyards and which stay as wild watersheds or forests? This is a great case study for how zoning and land use planning can shape an entire landscape. In Napa, strong farmland protection, especially through the agricultural preserve, has helped keep large areas in agriculture rather than be converted to suburban development. But that success comes with trade-offs. The same rules that protect vineyards can also create tension around the environment, tourism pressure, and housing availability and affordability. So as we go through this case study, your job is to look at both sides: how zoning can preserve farmland, and what conflicts or costs can show up because of those protections. First, let's look at the land use rules that define Napa's agricultural preserve and how they've shaped the region. Napa's wine country isn't just the result of market demand. It's also the result of deliberate zoning and land use rules in Napa County. One major example is the agricultural preserve created in 1968. It was one of the first policies of its kind in the U.S. And when you combine it with watershed and open space zoning, it keeps over 90% of the county protected from major urban development, meaning things like subdivisions and malls are largely off limits in those zones. But preservation comes with tensions, and that's where Measure C comes in. In 2018, Measure C proposed stricter limits on oak woodland removal on hillsides and in watershed areas. Environmental groups framed it as ecosystem protection, while many vineyard operators saw it as restricting vineyard expansion, and in the end, it was defeated. So the big takeaway is, zoning can protect farmland for decades, but debates continue at the edges, especially when environmental protection and agricultural growth collide. Even though the agricultural preserve helped protect farmland, it also created new tensions. This slide highlights two big ones: tourism and housing. First, tourism. Napa's wine economy brings in huge revenue through tastings, events, and visitors. But that success can overload rural roads and neighborhoods, more traffic, noise, tour buses, and pressure to expand tasting rooms. The tension is real. The economy depends on visitors, but everyday livability can suffer when tourism gets too intense. Second, housing. When most of the county's land is protected for farming or open space, there's far less room to build new housing. That drives up prices and makes it hard to find affordable options, especially for farm workers. So towns have to look at infill projects or dedicated worker housing. The key point is, zoning is always a trade-off. It can help prevent farmland loss, but it also shapes traffic, housing costs, and who can live and work nearby. Now it's your turn to think like a city planner. In our City Planner Storyboard activity, you'll work in teams to identify a challenge, like a blighted vacant lot, and use what you've learned about zoning and policy to design an urban farming solution. This activity shifts from analyzing real world case studies to imagining how policy and zoning decisions play out in practice. The goal is to show the process through a 3 to 5 panel storyboard, almost like a comic strip. Show us how your community gets involved and what the final outcome looks like. Is it a farm? A market? New jobs? You tell the story. To wrap up Lesson 8, let's review. First, which Riverside zone allows for a full-scale farm with animals? Second, what are the two big requirements for a UAE's contract regarding time and size? And third, what is one trade-off of protecting land, as we saw in our California case studies? Take a moment to discuss these questions and see if you've mastered the rungs of the policy ladder. Here are some possible answers. The best fit is RA5 because it supports active farming and allows a small on-site farm stand, while R1 to 7,000 is limited to home gardens, and PF is mainly for public institutions like schools. The two basic UAE's requirements are a minimum 5-year contract term and an eligible lot size range of 0.10 to 3 acres. From the California case studies, protecting agricultural land can preserve farmland and open space, but it can also create a housing squeeze by limiting land available for new homes. Similarly, one-for-one set-asides can reduce farmland loss, but may also constrain urban growth and shift development pressure elsewhere. Lesson B, Rules of the Game. Selling produce and food safety shifts from land use and zoning to the rules of the marketplace. Once food is grown, it must be handled and sold in ways that keep consumers safe. These rules apply to both small urban farms and large industrial operations. How can food safety rules support both small urban farms and large industrial farms while protecting consumers? This lesson will unpack how markets certify producers, what rules govern produce sales, and how these regulations shape opportunities and challenges for urban farmers. Think about the Riverside Downtown Farmers Market. It's a vibrant place, but it's not a free-for-all. Every Saturday from 8 a.m. to 1 p.m., farmers gather under a strict set of rules. Farmers markets are one of the most visible ways we connect directly with growers, and they're a great entry point for talking about certification and food safety, because not every market works the same way. Quick show of hands, who's been to a farmer's market, and who's actually bought produce there? Let's pause for a bit. Here's the key idea. Farmers markets aren't just shopping spots, they're regulated spaces with rules producers have to follow. Most of us see the booths, but not the rulebook behind them. Let's look at what it takes for a grower to be part of one. Farmers markets can feel super casual, like you just show up, grab some strawberries, and go, but they're actually highly regulated. There are rules about what you can sell, and those rules exist to protect people's health and keep things fair for vendors. Quick question. If you made homemade salsa at home, could you set up a booth and sell it at the farmers market this weekend? Most people guess yes, but the answer is no. Homemade or processed foods usually can't be sold without the right licensing and permits because markets need food to be safe, traceable, and compliant with health rules. And even for produce, markets aren't open to just anyone. Sellers typically need to be certified producers, meaning they've proven they actually grew what they're selling and they're handling it the right way. So if you can't just show up with salsa, how do you sell at a farmer's market? You become a certified producer, and that's what we'll look at next. What does it mean when we say a market is certified? In California, certified farmers markets are state regulated and they're supposed to be grower only. That means 2 levels of certification have to happen. First, the market itself gets registered and inspected by the County Agricultural Commissioner, so the site is officially recognized as a certified farmers market, basically confirming it's truly direct from farmer, not resellers or middlemen. Second, each seller has to be a certified producer. In plain terms, you have to prove you actually grew what you're selling. Inspections help confirm that what's on the table matches what's on that farmer's land. And that's the whole point, trust and fairness. Customers know it's legit, and growers know everyone's playing by the same rules. Selling at a certified farmer's market isn't as simple as showing up with a box of tomatoes. There's a real process behind it, and it's there to keep things legit and safe. Step 1. The farmer gets a Certified Producer Certificate, or CPC, from the County Agricultural Commissioner. That's basically their legal ticket to sell specific crops they actually grow. Step 2. They apply to join a certified market. The market manager runs the site and holds the health permit for the whole market, so the entire space stays compliant. Step 3. They follow food safety basics at the stall, things like a hand washing setup, clear labels, and keeping produce shaded and protected. So the big idea is it's part paperwork, part practical safety. And together, those rules protect consumers and make sure only verified growers are selling. Next, we'll look at inspections and how compliance can feel different for small urban farmers versus larger operations. Certification doesn't end once a stall is set up. Growers must also follow a compliance checklist to stay in good standing at the market. To stay compliant, every vendor needs this 5-point checklist. Your CPC posted for all to see, a hand wash station with gloves, a county sealed scale for fair pricing, clear labels on all packages, and a cold chain log for sensitive greens like lettuce. If an inspector walks by and you're missing one of these, you could be shut down for the day. Now imagine you're a rooftop grower in downtown LA. To sell your microgreens, you apply for that CPC, pass an inspection where an official visits your rooftop mini farm to prove you're actually growing your product there. And then you join the market where in addition to your booth, you'll need to meet the 5-point compliance checklist we discussed earlier. It sounds like a lot of work, but this process is what protects your brand and makes customers feel safe buying from you. There is a big difference between selling at a farmer's market and selling to a grocery store. Markets are simpler. You only need a CPC, a local inspection, and follow basic on-site hygiene. Grocery stores, however, require GAP audits, which stands for Good Agricultural Practices. They also require higher insurance, a registered packing facility, and complex traceability and recall plans. It's a level up in the rules of the game that requires more investment and better record keeping. Why does all this matter? It's about protecting the whole community. Traceability means that if a crop is contaminated, we can track it back to the exact field in hours, not weeks. These rules support small farms by providing a simplified path to direct sales while keeping the entire food system safe. When trust in food safety breaks down, the whole market suffers. Farmers markets are a pretty friendly entry point for small growers. But once you try to sell into grocery stores, the bar jumps way up. Grocery chains need produce that's not just fresh, but safe, traceable, and low risk from a liability standpoint. One big step is packing facility registration with the California Department of Public Health. If you're washing, packing, or boxing produce for retail, your setup has to meet sanitation and handling standards, so your farm starts functioning a bit more like a mini food processing operation. Then there's food safety verification, like a GAP audit tied to FSMA expectations. Buyers often want proof through documentation and outside inspection that everything from worker hygiene to water testing is being done the right way, from field to shelf. You also have to level up your record keeping, tracking what you harvested, when and where it went, sometimes with really organized logs or even software. And you need a safety net. Stores typically require a recall plan and liability insurance, often around $1 to $2 million. That protects everyone. But it can be expensive for small growers. So the key point is, scaling up isn't just grow more. It's more paperwork, more rules, and more financial risk. That's why farmers markets are often the easier lane, while grocery chains expect full compliance. Here's a quick equity lens activity. Not all neighborhoods have equal access to land, food, or resources, and zoning and policy can either reinforce or reduce those gaps. In pairs or small groups, pick 2 neighborhoods, one with strong food access and one facing barriers. Compare grocery options and whether there's space for gardens, markets, or farms. Identify the main barriers, like limited land, restrictive zoning, high costs, safety concerns, or lack of water. Then propose one realistic policy change, a zoning update, a UAE-style incentive, or support for community gardens. You'll share a brief 2 to 3 minute summary of your comparison, barriers, and solution. Now it's time for a review of Lesson B. Here are some questions. First, what exactly is a certified farmer's market, and what does it mean to be a certified producer? Next, how do the food safety rules at these markets actually protect shoppers? What are they trying to prevent or control? And finally, if you're a small grower, what steps would you have to take to legally sell your produce at a certified market? Let's pause here to discuss. Here are the answers. A certified farmer's market is a state-regulated, producer-only market that's registered and inspected. A certified producer is a farmer approved by the county ag commissioner to sell crops they actually grew. Food safety rules protect shoppers through traceability, clean handling, and proper labeling, and for higher risk items, basic temperature control. To sell at a CFM, a small grower needs a certified producer's certificate, must join a permitted market, and set up a stall that follows the required safety practices. So far, we've talked about land and zoning in Lesson A and food safety rules in Lesson B. Now, in Lesson C, we focus on the next step. How do urban farmers actually turn crops into cash flow? If you had one city block of farmland, what would you grow? How would you sell it? And how would you keep it sustainable? Lesson C will take you into the financial side of farming, from break-even pricing to sales channels, and help you to start thinking like farmer entrepreneurs. Our focus is on both the opportunities and the risks of running an urban agribusiness. Let's start with a quick budget poll. Which of these do you think is the biggest budget slice for a regular lettuce farm? Is it seeds, all labor, fertilizers/pesticides, post-harvest and packing, or equipment/tools? Think about what it takes to get that salad from the field to your plate. Where is most of the money actually going? All right, here's the reveal. For lettuce, labor is typically the biggest cost. Lettuce is very hands-on from planting through harvest, and California labor rules and wages make that slice even larger. Farming isn't just planting and harvesting, it's a cash flow puzzle. Money goes out in stages, and money usually comes in only at the very end. This roadmap shows the basic journey. First are startup costs, things you pay for before you even plant, like seeds, tools, and setup. For urban farms, that might mean raised beds or irrigation. Then you've got day-to-day costs that never stop, especially labor, plus water and utilities. While crops are growing, farmers often need operating capital to cover months of expenses. And if they borrow money, interest adds more cost. Next come harvest and post-harvest costs, packing, storage, transport, and basic compliance. After that, the big question is the break-even point. Do your sales actually cover all your costs? Finally, revenue arrives through your sales channel, like farm stands and farmers markets, or bigger options like CSAs and grocery contracts. The takeaway: costs stack up long before revenue shows up, so managing cash flow is just as important as growing the crop. Look at this breakdown of where the money goes. When you zoom in on a farm budget, not all costs are equal. The biggest slice is labor, about 55%, because planting, weeding, harvesting, and handling are mostly hands-on, especially for vegetables and leafy greens. Next are inputs and field operations, around 32%, like seeds, fertilizer, water, pest control, and equipment or fuel. Then rent and overhead, about 13%, which can be a big deal in cities where land and utilities cost more. And even interest on operating capital, though small, reminds us that farming often means paying costs months before getting paid. Bottom line, knowing this breakdown is the starting point for setting prices and calculating break-even. Farming is a little different from most businesses because you spend a lot of money up front, but you often don't get paid until months later at harvest. That time gap is why farms need operating capital, which is simply the money used to cover costs before any revenue comes in. Operating capital includes things like seeds, fertilizer, fuel, water, and wages, all paid weeks or months before the crop is sold. And interest matters because waiting has a cost. If you borrow money, you pay loan interest. But even if you use your own savings, that money could have earned interest or returned somewhere else. So there's still an opportunity cost. That's why farm budgets include an interest charge. It captures the real cost of tying money up while the crop grows. We can actually calculate this interest to see the true cost of waiting. The formula is average cash tied up times annual interest rate times fraction of the year. For a typical California lettuce farm, we might have $14,500 per acre tied up. At a 4% interest rate over a 3-month crop cycle, that's about $145 per acre. In that budget, it's roughly about 1% of the total cost. That might sound small, but across many acres and multiple seasons, it adds up, and it's a reminder that in farming, time is money. Knowing this helps farmers compare different crops fairly and understand their risks. Every farm needs to know its break-even point, the exact price where revenue equals costs. If you sell below that price, you're losing money. Above it, you start earning profit. This is the backbone of farm decision-making. The formula is simple. Break-even price equal total farming cost divide marketable yield. Total cost includes everything: labor, inputs, rent, overhead, post-harvest handling, and even interest on operating capital. And marketable yield means what you can actually sell because not every plant makes it to market due to pests, weather, or culling. Here's a quick example. If it costs $16,793 to grow an acre of lettuce and you harvest 850 cartons, break even is $16,793 divided by 850, which is $19.76 per carton. If the market pays $25, you profit. If it drops to $12, you lose money on every carton. The takeaway is, break even isn't just math, it's a tool that helps farmers decide what to plant and where to sell. Let's look at our lettuce case study. If our operating costs are $14,500 an acre and we harvest 850 cartons, our break-even price is $14,500 divided by 850, which equals $17.06 per carton. If the market price is only $16, we lose money. If it's $18, we profit. Knowing this number is what helps you decide if a crop is worth the risk before you even plant the first seed. Once a farmer knows their costs and break-even price, the next big question is, how do you actually sell what you grow? For small and urban farms in California, there are three main avenues, each with trade-offs. First, farm stands or farmers markets. This is direct to consumer, so you keep the full retail price and build strong community trust, but you're limited by market hours and it takes labor to sell. Second, an online storefront. You can take orders anytime and reach more customers, but you also take on delivery or pickup logistics, plus marketing and customer service. Third, wholesale, selling in bulk to places like restaurants or through CSA-style boxes. It can move a lot of product and create steadier income, but prices are usually lower and quality and consistency standards are higher. The key point, there's no single best channel. Many farms use a mix to balance cash flow, stability, and community connection. Next, we'll look at how farmers decide which mix makes the most sense. Avenue number 1, farm stands, is very popular for beginners. It has low startup costs, usually between $2,000 and $5,000. You get a direct connection to your customers and can build trust in your neighborhood. On average, these stands can bring in around $55,000 a year. It's high effort but low barrier to market entry for urban farmers. Running a farm stand is more than a table and some produce. It has three main parts: the site, the paperwork, and the daily operations. First, site and hardware. It needs to be on properly zoned land, like RA5 or RC, and you'll need shade, tables, signage, and a secure way to take payments. Second, paperwork and permits. You need a certified producer certificate, a city or county business license, a county sealed scale, and basic hand wash and food safety compliance. Third, supply chain tasks. Harvest daily, weigh and price each morning. And for higher risk items like cut greens, keep a temperature log for cold chain safety. It's a lot of manual labor, but the community connection is unmatched. Let's quickly weigh the pros and cons of farm stands. On the plus side, they're low cost to start, often just a few $1,000s. They also give farmers a direct connection with customers, which helps build loyalty, trust, and strong community visibility. On the downside, farm stands usually have limited revenue potential, and success depends a lot on location and foot traffic. And even though they look simple, you still need permits, inspections, and basic compliance. So the key idea is, farm stands are low cost and high visibility, but they work best as one part of a bigger sales strategy. Avenue number 2 is the online storefront. Nearly half of California's direct market farms now sell online. It has a much higher revenue potential, averaging around $120,000 a year, because you can reach people far beyond your local neighborhood. The trade-off is added costs, roughly $1,000 to $3,000 per year for the website platform and payment processing, about $3,000 to $6,000 upfront for insulated packaging and coolers, and often about $4,000 per year more for liability insurance, plus ongoing labor and delivery costs. Your market is suddenly anyone within a delivery or shipping radius. To run an online store, you need three things: the right setup, the right paperwork, and a reliable weekly fulfillment routine. On the setup side, you'll need a clean wash and pack space with potable water, plus basic tech, phone or laptop, internet, and tools for labels and route planning. If you're selling cut greens or other times/temperature-controlled foods, you also need cold chain, like insulated shippers or a chilled route setup to keep produce at 41 degrees Fahrenheit or below. On the paperwork side, it can include registrations for washing and packing, a seller's permit, food safety records, and updated liability insurance, always depending on local rules. Then the weekly pipeline looks like orders close, you generate a harvest plan, harvest and cool quickly, pack and label with lot info, deliver on a route while tracking temps, and then reconcile inventory and customer issues at the end of the week. The bottom line is that online scales smoothly only if the back end, labels, routes, and cold chain is tight. The pros of online sales include its higher revenue potential, often around $120,000 a year, and subscriptions can help stabilize cash flow. You can sell 24/7, take pre-orders to plan harvests, and you get customer data that supports bundles, add-ons, and repeat sales. You can also reach farther than a farm stand. The trade-offs are real though. Higher ongoing costs, platform fees, packaging, insurance, and the headache of delivery logistics, cold chain risk, and extra admin like substitutions and refunds. And if you start washing and packing more, you may trigger additional compliance. So online works best with a dense delivery radius or pickup hubs, higher average order values, and reliable space and labor on fixed pack and delivery days. Avenue number 3 is where an urban farm starts operating more like a wholesale business, selling to restaurants or running CSA contracts. CSA stands for Community Supported Agriculture. This is a common scaling pathway. In California, many farms use one or both models because they can create bigger and more predictable markets than a farm stand or small online sales. The upside is the revenue potential. On average, farms in this channel can reach around $126,000 per year, and some earn more if they lock in strong weekly buyers or a large CSA membership. But the trade-off is that this avenue comes with the highest startup costs. Farms often spend $12,000 to $23,000 upfront to meet formal food safety and business requirements, like $6,000 to $10,000 for a GAP audit, $2,000 to $5,000 for traceability and recall software, and about $4,000 per year for product liability insurance, plus added labor and delivery costs. So what does it actually take to set up and run this kind of wholesale channel? To serve restaurants or CSA programs, you need professional-grade infrastructure, paperwork, and logistics, much more than a farm stand or online storefront. On the facility side, buyers expect a GAP-approved packing shed with sanitation systems, enough space for pallet staging, and often roll-up doors for loading and unloading. You'll also need lot code labeling, a printer, and scanner, so every box can be traced back to a harvest date and field block. And because freshness matters, you need cold chain capacity, like cold storage and ideally a refrigerated van to keep produce at the right temperature during delivery. Then comes the compliance and business side, a produce handler registration, a third-party GP or LGMA audit, and typically $1 to $2 million in product liability insurance because buyers want protection if there's ever a food safety issue. Finally, you'll need a signed vendor agreement or contract spelling out specs, delivery schedules, and payment terms. And the day-to-day reality is demanding. You must pack exactly to spec, palletize correctly, keep temperature and traceability logs, and deliver on time, every time, with proof like a signed bill of lading. Let's weigh the pros and cons and decide when avenue number 3 makes sense. On the pro side, this avenue offers some of the highest earning potential, averaging about $126,000 per year. It can also provide stability. Restaurant contracts can mean predictable weekly orders, and CSAs often bring upfront payments, which improves cash flow and reduces the risk of harvesting crops without a buyer. But there are major cons. The costs are high, audits, software, insurance, labor, cold chain, and delivery add up quickly. And the requirements are strict. You're responsible for traceability records, recall readiness, and formal food safety compliance. You also have to deliver consistent quality and volume week after week, which can be hard for small farms dealing with weather, labor shortages, or seasonal variation. Key takeaway: avenue number 3 can be the best growth path for farms ready to scale, but it locks you into the wholesale world, where systems, documentation, and reliability matter as much as growing the crop. Now let's head to our optional activity corner, the scaling and regulation map. Here's the big idea. When a farm grows from small to medium to large, the rules, costs, and opportunities change. Scaling isn't just grow more food. It's also learning to navigate a bigger rulebook. In your group, you're going to build a simple 3-stage growth map. You can use a pathway like small, farm stand only, then medium, online store with local delivery, then large, restaurant or CSA contracts. Or you can create your own stages. For each stage, add three things: which rules apply, what those rules cost, and what they unlock, and one innovation that could reduce the burden, like digital temperature loggers, shared delivery routes, or cooperative insurance. Then each group will share a quick 2 to 3 minute summary showing how compliance evolves as farms scale. The takeaway is, as farms grow, compliance gets more demanding, but it can also open doors to bigger, more stable markets. And that leads us into the next discussion. When does regulation protect us, and when does it become a barrier? Here we need to ask ourselves a big, uncomfortable question. Should a small farmer and a supermarket supplier follow the same rules for selling the same tomato? Food safety rules exist for a reason. They protect people. But the same requirement can feel completely different depending on the size of the farm. For a small urban farmer, a new certification or compliance step isn't just paperwork. It can mean new equipment, new training, new time, and thousands of dollars. And in some cases, it can be business ending. So today we'll explore challenging regulation. How do we protect public health without regulating small and mid-sized farmers out of the market? Regulation is both protection and pressure, and fairness depends on scale. To understand why the rules are so strict, we need to look at what happened when food safety failed. Before we call regulations red tape, we need to remember why they exist. Many food safety rules were written in response to real outbreaks that harmed people and shook public trust. Foodborne illness isn't rare. It affects millions of Americans each year. And when a major outbreak occurs, the impact goes far beyond the farm where it started. It can ripple across the entire food system, hurting consumers, collapsing markets, and damaging trust for everyone. Let's look at real examples that shape modern food safety policy. Here are two outbreaks that changed the way the U.S. thinks about produce safety. In 2006, an E. coli outbreak linked to spinach sickened nearly 200 people and caused deaths. In 2011, a listeria outbreak linked to cantaloupe was even more devastating, 147 cases and 33 deaths. These events made it clear that in a large distribution system, a single contamination event can affect people across multiple states. Public fear rises fast, headlines spread faster, and the pressure to act becomes intense. That pressure led to a major shift in federal food safety law. When people lose trust in food safety, the whole market suffers. After repeated outbreaks, the U.S. passed the Food Safety Modernization Act, or FSMA, in 2011, the first major update to food safety law in over 70 years. FSMA pushed a big change. Instead of only reacting to outbreaks, farms and food facilities must analyze hazards and build preventive controls. Basically, plan for safety before something goes wrong. That's a good goal. But it also adds new layers of documentation, training, and infrastructure, costs that are much harder for small operations to carry. Regulation protects public health, but it can also raise the cost of doing business. Next, we'll compare what regulation looks like at different sales levels. Think of food safety requirements like a ladder. At the lower rungs, like selling at a certified farmer's market, the rules are lighter and more local. Farmers typically need a certified producer certificate, CPC, and must follow basic hygiene practices: clean tools, hand washing, safe sampling, and local inspections. At the top rung, selling to major grocery chains or large buyers, the requirements become much more formal. Grocery systems often require GAAP audits, liability insurance, traceability systems, and sometimes facility upgrades like dedicated wash/pack infrastructure. So, the same tomato faces very different regulations depending on where it's sold. And this is where regulation becomes challenging. Here's the problem. A requirement that's manageable for a large agribusiness can be overwhelming for a small farm. A GAAP audit, a recall plan, or $1 million insurance policy may feel like a standard checkbox to a large company with compliance staff. But for a small farm, those same requirements can decide whether they grow or stall, whether they compete or quit. Let's see what that looks like with a simple example. Now let's discuss an example of financial burden in urban farming. Imagine a GAAP audit costs $1,500 per year. For Farmer A, a small farm earning $50,000 annually, that audit is 3% of total revenue, enough to wipe out a thin profit margin. For Farmer B, a large operation earning $5 million, that same $1,500 is 0.03%, Basically, a rounding error. Same rule, same price, completely different impact. The takeaway here is that equal rules don't always create equal burdens. And when costs hit unevenly, they can change who gets to compete. Because the burden is uneven, many small farms avoid certain markets, not because they're unsafe, but because compliance mandates can erase their profits. This can create an unfair advantage for large operations. When big farms can easily absorb compliance costs, regulations can become a barrier to entry, keeping smaller competitors out of high-value markets like grocery chains and large distributors. Now let's zoom out. Where do these expanding rules come from? Food safety laws don't appear out of nowhere, they're often written in response to a crisis. A clear example is the 2006 E. coli outbreak linked to spinach, which sickened nearly 200 people and caused deaths. That single event triggered intense national attention and shook consumer confidence far beyond the farms involved. And even though the outbreak was tied to a specific contamination incident, the response affected the entire leafy greens sector. Moments like this are a major reason broader federal rules expanded. In fact, outbreaks like the spinach crisis helped set the stage for the Food Safety Modernization Act, FSMA, in 2011, which established stronger nationwide food safety expectations, including for farms that were never connected to the original outbreak. So how does a single outbreak turn into rules that apply to everyone? A lot of it comes down to the role of media and public pressure. After an outbreak, media headlines can amplify fear and create the sense that food in general is unsafe. When that happens, public pressure rises fast, and lawmakers feel pushed to do something immediately. The result is that regulation often expands in a broad sweep, applying to all farms in a category, not just the ones responsible. The goal is consumer protection, but the impact is uneven. Farms that had nothing to do with the outbreak can still be required to add new paperwork, new infrastructure, and new compliance costs. This is what people mean by a one-way ratchet effect. After each crisis, new layers of rules get added, and they rarely get removed later. Everyone carries the consequences, but small farms often feel it the most, because a new requirement can be financially and operationally overwhelming. Crises drive regulation forward quickly, and the expanded requirements can reshape who is able to compete. Next, we'll look at who tends to win and who tends to lose when regulation expands this way, from consumers to grocery chains to small farms. Regulation isn't neutral. It creates winners. Consumers win through safer produce and reduced outbreak risk. Grocery chains win because audits and documentation reduce liability and protect brand trust. Large agribusinesses often win because they can hire compliance staff and legal teams, and they can absorb costs that smaller farms can't. Rules protect trust and safety, but they also reward scale. Now let's look at who loses and why. Small farms can lose because compliance costs, audits, insurance, paperwork, facility upgrades can erase their livelihood. And diverse or sustainable farms can be hit especially hard. If you grow 20 crops, you may face multiplied record keeping and inspection complexity compared to a single crop operation. So regulation doesn't just protect food safety, it can reshape the food system, favoring scale and uniformity over local diversity. That brings us to the ethical trade-off at the center of this issue. We've seen that regulation is built to protect consumers, but it can also place heavy burdens on small and mid-sized farms. The real debate isn't whether food safety matters. It's where we draw the line between necessary protection and rules that unintentionally push farmers out. FSMA does try to recognize equity. Very small farms, often those with under $25,000 in sales, may qualify for exemptions. But many farms fall into a gray zone. They're too big to be exempt, yet too small to afford the full compliance system that large suppliers can manage easily. These mid-sized farms often feel the most pressure, caught between survival and regulation. So this becomes an ethical question, not just a technical one. How much safety is enough to protect the public? And at what cost to the farmers who provide local, sustainable, and diverse food options? Challenging regulation is about values, safety, fairness, sustainability, and access. As we close, think like a policymaker. How would you protect consumers while making sure small and mid-sized farms can survive? Now it's your turn to step into the role of a thinker and a policymaker. We've explored why regulation exists, who tends to benefit, who gets squeezed, and how the exact same rule can create unequal burdens depending on farm size. There aren't perfect answers here. The goal is to reason through trade-offs, so I want you to sit with three questions. First, if you were designing food safety policy, would you prioritize consumer protection or small farmer survival, and why? Second, do strict regulations make our food system more sustainable in the long run? Or do they push us toward fewer, larger, less diverse farms? Third, who should carry the greatest burden of risk in the food system, consumers, small farmers, or large agribusiness? Because in the end, regulation is always a set of choices about values, equity, and responsibility. Next, we'll apply this thinking by comparing how different regions design food regulation. So far, we've focused mostly on how regulation works in the US. But food systems are global, and different regions regulate food in different ways. In this Think Pair Share, you'll build a regulation comparison matrix. Start by thinking on your own. What do US food safety rules do well, and where do they fall short? Then pair up and compare your ideas. After that, your group will choose two regulation systems to compare, maybe California's approach versus the European Union's farm-to-fork strategy, or another pairing your teacher provides. As you build your matrix, you're basically telling three stories for each system. First, what are the benefits? Does it improve food safety, sustainability, or consumer trust? Second, what are the costs? How much money, paperwork, infrastructure, or labor does it take to follow the rules? And third, what happens from an equity perspective? Who benefits most? Who struggles? And how do those impacts change depending on whether a farm is small or large? When you share out, keep coming back to one key question. Who finds the rules easiest to follow, and who might be pushed out? The takeaway is that every policy design involves trade-offs between safety, cost, and fairness. Now let's wrap up Lesson C by checking our understanding of the financial and business concepts behind these farm decisions. Let's wrap up with a quick review to connect everything from Lesson C. Here are three questions. 1. What is break-even pricing? And what are the three main sales avenues for urban farms? 2. What is the biggest operating cost for a California lettuce farm, and why? 3. If you have limited startup cash but high foot traffic, which sales channel is best, and why? Take a moment to answer on your own, then we'll go through the key answers together. Here are the key answers. Break-even pricing is calculated as total cost divided by marketable yield. The three main sales avenues we discussed are farm stands, online stores, and restaurants/CSA contracts. For many California lettuce farms, the biggest operating cost is labor, often around 40%, because lettuce is labor-intensive to harvest and handle, and California has high wage and overtime costs. If you have limited startup cash but high foot traffic, the best channel is usually a farm stand. It has relatively low setup costs, often around $2,000 to $5,000, and you can sell directly without shipping, packaging logistics, or third-party platform fees. To wrap up Module 7, let's pull everything together. This module connected three big ideas: where farms can grow, Lesson A; how rules shape markets, Lesson B; and how farmers build financial viability, Lesson C. When you put those together, you get the foundation for sustainable, legal, and profitable urban agriculture. First, protect land and people. Zoning policies like residential agricultural RA5 or tools like UAIZ shape where farming is allowed and help preserve farmland as cities expand. These rules also protect communities by separating farming areas from incompatible uses and reducing conflicts between agriculture and development. Second, steward resources wisely. Sustainable farming isn't just about growing food, it's about managing limited resources like water, labor, and inputs. In California, water scarcity pushes farms toward efficient irrigation, and high labor costs make planning and fair wages essential. Good stewardship supports both environmental health and community well-being. Third, comply and stay safe. Regulations around food safety, certification, and pesticides are not optional. Compliance protects consumers and builds public trust. It also opens doors. Without the right permits, inspections, and paperwork, farms can't access certified farmers markets or larger buyers like grocery stores. And finally, know your numbers. Farming is biology and business. Success depends on tracking costs, calculating break-even prices, and understanding how compliance affects the bottom line. Tools like cost and return studies, spreadsheets, and break-even formulas help farmers make smart, realistic decisions, because even great farming practices can fail without financial planning. Here's the overarching takeaway. Thriving urban farms require four pillars working together: land protection, resource stewardship, regulatory compliance, and financial planning. As you reflect on Module 7, think about how these pillars, land, resources, compliance, and finances, interact to make urban farming sustainable and resilient. This mind map is here to help you see the big picture from Module 7 at a glance: how urban agriculture is shaped by land use rules, incentives, and compliance. At the center is the core idea: urban policy, land use, and agribusiness. Policy decisions determine who can farm, where they can farm, and what rules they have to follow. Across the map, you'll see the major forces that set the limits: zoning, water, and labor laws. You'll also see how rules operate at different levels: local, like residential agricultural RA5, single family residential R1, and public facility PF, gardens, state, California Department of Food and Agriculture CDFA rules, and federal United States Department of Agriculture USDA, Food and Drug Administration FDA, and Environmental Protection Agency EPA standards. The map also highlights the UAIZ Act, which uses incentives to turn vacant lots into farms through 5-year contracts on 0.1 to 3 acres, and the community benefits that can follow: green space, ecology, local jobs, food access, and food education. And the final reminder is this: even if you can grow food, selling it still depends on permits and compliance. Overall, the map shows how zoning defines space, regulations build trust, and incentives like UAIZ encourage urban farming. Urban farming isn't just about growing food, it sits at the intersection of policy, compliance, sustainability, business, marketing, and logistics. So the career options go way beyond farmer. On the policy and compliance side, that can look like working as an urban planner shaping zoning decisions, supporting the County Agricultural Commissioner's Office with inspections and certifications, or becoming a food safety inspector or FSMA/GAP auditor. It can also mean quality assurance work inside packing and food businesses to make sure handling and compliance are done correctly. On the sustainability and science side, careers include being a greenhouse or farm manager, working in cooperative extension to bring research into real farms, supporting growers as a certified crop advisor, or helping with the numbers as a farm budget consultant or agribusiness analyst. Financing matters too. Some people work as ag loan officers, helping farms access capital. And on the marketing and logistics side, you might run distribution as a farmer's market manager or CZ coordinator, source products as a retail produce buyer, manage safe transport as a cold chain or ag logistics specialist, or oversee traceability and recall programs. The big takeaway is that agriculture needs people in roles such as policy, science, business, and logistics, not just in the field. As we wrap up Module 7, think about where your skills fit and what role you could play in the future of urban agriculture. Module 7 covered zoning, compliance, and business strategy, and those ideas can feel abstract until you actually use them. That's why the hands-on activities are built to make the rules and numbers feel real through practice. First, you'll do a zoning match activity. You'll work with a city zoning map and match different types of agriculture, like a community garden, a school garden, a residential garden, or an RA5 farm, to the zones where they're allowed. The point is to make one key lesson stick. Zoning rules decide where agriculture can happen. Next is pass the inspection, a role play. Some of you will act as vendors, setting up a stall. Some as inspectors, checking items such as certificates, scales, and temperature logs. And some as buyers, deciding whether the stall looks safe and trustworthy. It's a fast way to see how compliance shapes trust and whether you can actually sell. Finally, you'll build a mini market plan. You'll pick one sales avenue, farm stand, online storefront, or CSA/restaurant contracts, and sketch out startup costs and a simple budget. This connects directly to break-even thinking and the business side of farming. These activities aren't about memorizing rules. They're about thinking like planners, inspectors, and entrepreneurs, and practicing the real trade-offs farmers face in a practical, fun way. That brings us to the end of Module 7, where policy, land, and business come together to shape the future of urban farming.